Welcome to The Kill File, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown, because in The Kill File, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 42 of The Kill File. I am so glad that you guys are back for another episode. First thing I want to do is shout out those of you who are supporting The Kill File by sharing things on your own social media. That means more to me than you know. Morgan, I am talking to you. Also, I want to put it out there that as I am working on things for bonus content for the upcoming subscription service where you can pay a few bucks for extra content from me, one thing that may end up being like an episode thrown in here and there for you guys are some of your own true crime stories that I can read on the podcast and talk about. So if you have a true crime story that you want to be possibly read on the podcast, email it to me at thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com. Just keep in mind that the bonus content won't come out until probably after the summer. I am going to be recording it this summer, though, so just hang in there. You will get to hear your stuff on the podcast if you get the bonus content. Just let me know in the subject line that it's a true crime story. Okay, that's it for today's business. Let's get to today's case. Today we're going to talk about a serial killer from the UK named Archibald Hall. Trigger warnings for today are going to be brutality and murder. Archibald Thompson Hall was born in June of 1924 in Glasgow, Scotland. He was the oldest of three kids to what was said to be a caring, working-class set of parents. One source said that his father was actually a post office clerk. Hall was known to absolutely hate the fact that he was named after his father and asked people to call him Roy instead of Archibald. It was also said that Hall's mother was constantly undermining Hall's father when it came to the authority of Archibald Sr. over his son. So his mother would also indulge Hall as well. I can imagine that would be confusing as a young child if you constantly undermine authority figures in your child's life. They may grow up to not have a ton of respect for authority, but that's just my opinion. While there isn't a ton known about his childhood, there was a few things to be said. Hall struggled most of his adolescence to make connections and maintain friendships, and in turn, he was kind of excluded socially, so a bit of a loner. It wouldn't be long before Hall would start to make waves around him with petty theft and schemes. One source said that while Hall was a teenager, he had this one particular scam where he would have 2 Red Cross collection bins, and he would donate the change that was left to the actual Red Cross, but the paper money that he received, he would keep for himself. One thing that was said to have been known about Hall throughout his entire life was that he was absolutely obsessed with movies, and especially the ones with like the high-class life that was portrayed. Hall loved the grandiosity that came with the wealthy lifestyle and started to obsess about the fact that that's what he wanted in his life. In fact, much of his criminality would come from the thought that he was going to one day figure out a way to live the lifestyle that he saw in the movies. By the age of 15, Hall would already make authorities start to notice him with his petty crimes. When he was 17, he would have his first real brush with the law when he was arrested in 1941 for theft. During his court appearances, he would be judged as mentally unstable, and therefore he was actually sent to a psychiatric facility. A criminologist named Professor David Wilson was a man who had actually studied Archibald Hall during his teenage years, and he would go on to say that Hall was someone who liked to pretend that his own life was glamorous and never wanted to talk about the fact that he would actually be certified as being insane at least twice in his lifetime. Professor Wilson would go on to say that Hall would rather pretend to be in a life that wasn't really his, and he only really wanted to talk about how he felt that he had this very strong sexual magnetism. I really got the sense that Hall was someone who, and I feel like we've all met people like this, where if you start to talk about something that they don't like, or maybe even confront them with a situation or like a behavior of theirs that you don't like, they can't acknowledge what you're talking about, but they instead like quickly brush it off and redirect the conversation to something about themselves that they kind of feel like will impress you. It's like, dude, I don't give a shit that you own 3 cars. I'm talking about the fact that you just talked to me like I was an idiot, and I don't like being treated that way. Do you know what I mean? I hate people like this. It's like they don't live in reality. It's crazy to me. I feel like they're really only fooling themselves, and everyone else around them has them pegged, but they don't know it. Anyways, so while Hall would spend the next 10 years in a psychiatric hospital, instead of focusing on bettering himself or correcting behaviors, he would work and study etiquette and how aristocrats or high-class wealthy people behaved, acted, and spoke instead. He would also spend time dulling down his Scottish accent, and he would actually teach himself the elocution of someone from London who was high class and wealthy. Elocution, in case any of you don't know, because I sure as shit don't know bougie words like that, it just means that it's a particular style of speaking or speech with specific articulation and pronunciation. So Hall basically learned to speak and present himself in a manner that would make people think that he was wealthy and from a better place than he actually was. It was during this time that Hall decided to change his name, or at least what he wanted people to think his name was. Like, I don't know if he actually did it with the courts or if he just started going by a new name, but he chose the name Roy Fontaine. In fact, he would actually introduce himself as Dr. Roy Fontaine so that it would put people at ease around him. Apparently, Hall was obsessed with an actress named Joan Fontaine that was in an Alfred Hitchcock movie called Rebecca. To be honest, I have heard of the name Alfred Hitchcock, but I wanted to know if I've ever seen any of his movies. I definitely have not. They stopped coming out in like the mid to late 70s, except one that's newer. Maybe it's like a remake. I'm not sure, but I am curious if any of you guys have ever watched older movies like that from like the 30s and the 40s. To be honest, and just keep in mind that I am a fucking idiot, I didn't know that movies went back this far. I'm apparently an uncultured dumbass. Unless it's a movie that I grew up watching, it's hard for me to go back for older movies, but I wonder if I would like a super old movie like this. Anyways, that's where Hall got the idea for his made-up last name. It was said that Hall was actually bisexual, which we know later on, but one source said that he had been married at one point, but his marriage fell apart. Another source went on to say that his marriage was open, and this would lead to a flurry of affairs with men. Hall would claim to have affairs of a sexual nature with Lord Boothby and a playwright named Terence Rattigan. I don't know if people from across the pond know who these people are. I did not look them up. According to Hall's memoirs that he would write while he was incarcerated, he would say that the love of his life was a man named David Barnard, who unfortunately died in a car accident in 1974. So at this time, not only was being gay illegal in the UK, but with that, naturally people who were part of the LGBTQIA+ community were treated horribly. Not only from the police, obviously, but also from the rest of society. I hate that so much. People suck. At this time in the late 40s, Hall decided to leave Scotland and head to England, specifically Soho. When I looked it up, it says that Soho is a district of Westminster, which is a city in the West End of London. I wish I knew what all of that meant, like if it had a special meaning or something. I need to go visit the UK so I can get an idea of what the fuck I'm talking about. It was said that Hall liked to visit the nightclubs in England because they seemed to be a little more open-minded about the LGBTQIA+ community after the 50s, which is one of the reasons that Hall liked to go out there. When Hall had been growing up, his mother had been a housekeeper, and young Hall had learned and watched his mother, seeing just how much trust her employers had put in her. He realized that this is what he would do to get his foot in the door with the wealthy and high society that he always pretended to be. The man version, back then, of a housekeeper would have been a butler, and this, of course, for a thief would give him access to the homes of the wealthy and would have also given him access to their valuables and their accounts. Hall knew that if he acted like a perfect gentleman that he had been perfecting for so long now, that he could convince people that he was a trustworthy butler and then steal from them and become wealthy like the people that he admired. So that's exactly what he did. For the next 25 years of his life, he would be a butler to the wealthy, all the while stealing or conning various people and always going in and out of prison for getting caught. It was said that one time while he was a butler, he had actually stolen an invitation to a Hollywood party from his employer, and then he went to the party impersonating his employer, the one who was really invited to this party, and this was in Edinburgh. This had to be one of those things where this guy was like invited because he was rich or he was connected, right? Because otherwise, wouldn't people have noticed that they don't look the same, that they're not the same man? One con that he would claim to use is that he would bring a ring into a jewelry store, and the cost of the ring that he would bring in was like £100. And he would ask to look at a different ring that was like £1,000. And while he was looking at the ring, he would just switch them, and he would claim that the jeweler never even noticed and that he would make off with the more expensive ring. Again, Hall was known for his fantastic or fantasy-loving nature, so who knows if what he said is the truth. Hall loved being a thief, or at least felt compelled to steal because he did it so often. It was said that Hall was a very believable and good con man, although he wasn't always so good at the theft part because he often got caught. Hall would also try his hand in forgery, breaking into various shops to burglarize, and also stole jewelry from the rich. In 1973, Hall would go on to meet a man named David Wright, who he had met in prison, and the two were lovers. David Wright was said to be considered a small-time petty crook. I love that word, crook. But this man would end up having a huge impact on Hall's life. In 1977, after Hall had been released from another stint in prison for theft, he was able to land a job with a widow named Lady Peggy Hudson, whose husband had passed away, a Sir Austin Hudson, who was a man of parliament. In the UK, a member of parliament or an MP is someone who is elected to represent interests of the people and their concerns in the House of Commons. Hall went to work for Lady Hudson for lower wages than others would, but by all accounts, he seemed to be a refined gentleman. A Scottish journalist by the name of Frank Ryan had spoke to Lady Hudson about Hall, where she spoke to the fact that she had found him through an agency and that Hall came with a reference. It would later be found out that the reference was actually from a Mr. Whitten, who ended up being Hall's father-in-law, but Whitten had pretended to be a businessman and someone that could actually give Hall a reference. When Lady Hudson asked Hall why he was willing to take such a low salary at just £20 a week, when he could be out there like making more money with the jewelry trade or somewhere in London, Hall assured Lady Hudson that he absolutely loved living out in the country. You know, more of a simple pleasures life, and he didn't mind sacrificing his wages to do that. Lies. What Hall was really doing was not only scouting the house that he was working in, but also different houses in the area that he could potentially rob to gain the wealth that he so desperately wanted. In Hall's autobiography called The Perfect Gentleman, Hall would go on to say that he had sexual relations with Lady Hudson basically for charity, but again, this could be a lie. Who knows? I fucking hate when a guy says that he sleeps with a girl for charity. Like, nobody wants your pity sex. Go fuck yourself. By this age of 53, Hall had not only been in prison 10 separate times for theft, forgery, and possession of firearms, but he still wanted his fame and fortune and now would do anything to get it. As Hall is working for Lady Hudson, some sources say he was still planning on robbing her and other rich houses nearby. Others citing that he had actually grew fond of Lady Hudson and decided not to rob her. But either way, this is when Hall's old lover, David Wright, whom he had met in prison, would show up at Lady Hudson's estate. Turns out that Lady Hudson took a quick liking to David and then invited him to stay and work on her grounds as like her odd job man. Like whatever needed fixing or done, David, who at the time was in his 30s, would take care of it. Unfortunately, tension would start to rise between David and Hall because not only did David know Hall and who he really was and his true identity, but he also started to steal things from Lady Hudson. When Hall figured out that David had not only stole silver from Lady Hudson, but also a diamond ring, Hall told David to put it back. One source said at the time that David was scrounging money off of Hall and had been threatening to expose Hall if he didn't pay up. After the argument about the ring, Hall told David that he wanted to go straight and persuaded David to put the ring back at its place before Lady Hudson could even realize it was gone. After a night of heavy drinking, David would come back to the home completely smashed and attempted to shoot Hall while Hall was sleeping, but fortunately for Hall, he missed and hit the headboard. This is when David would actually hit Hall in the face with his weapon, and it would of course cause him to bleed. After some time, Hall was able to get David to settle down and get him to bed, and of course, David was asking for Hall's forgiveness. I mean, you try to shoot me in the head while I'm asleep, there will be no forgiveness, just saying. It was this night that Hall decided that David was a liability and had to go. The next day, Hall and David set out to do some rabbit hunting together. Now, according to a documentary episode I watched about this case called Conman Serial Killer and Butler Archibald Hall, the Monster Butler, Hall grabbed a .22 caliber rifle for the hunt and Wright grabbed a shotgun. That makes no sense to me, to try and hunt rabbits with a shotgun, but alright. While the pair was out hunting rabbits, Hall had made the note of how many bullets David's gun held and how many he had shot because he knew that that weapon only carried 8 bullets. After Hall knew that David's gun was empty, he picked up his rifle, pointed it at David, and shot him in the head. Then proceeded to shoot David 3 more times in the torso. Why? I'm not sure, but I'm guessing because he was angry. About this first murder at the age of 53, Hall would say, quote, "I picked up my gun and I turned it, and instead of aiming for the rabbit, I swung it around and I shot him through the head. I walked over to him and he was muttering. I shot him again, and then once more." End quote. After having killed David Wright, Hall took David's body and put it by a stream near him and put dirt over it again and again, trying to mask the victim and the odor that would soon follow. It was said that after this day, Hall would take Lady Hudson's Labrador for a walk and take the dog over to the body and continue to put earth and rocks on the corpse until the dog was no longer able to smell it. Hall had told Lady Hudson at the time that David had left because he had been offered a permanent position in another location, so he took the job and left. Eventually, Lady Hudson would start to have her doubts about Hall's story and just the whole persona that he had, and she would eventually find out about Hall's criminal past, so she would actually fire him and had police escort him from her home, where Hall would end up in a hotel somewhere else. Now, Hall would head on to London, where he would con his way into another butler position, this time for a Mr. Walter Scott Elliot and Mrs. Dorothy Elliot. The Elliots lived in an affluent area called Knightsville, located in West London. Mr. Elliot was an 82-year-old man, a former MP, which again is a member of Parliament, and his wife Dorothy was the daughter of a wealthy merchant from India. Pretty quickly into his new job, Hall would realize just how many antiques were in the Elliots' home and was already scheming to figure out how to make money off the older couple. It was said that not only was he thinking about his employer's home, but Hall had also been casing houses nearby and had started to make plans to rob them as well. Hall then realized that if he was going to try and pull off a robbery of the Elliots' home, that he was going to need some help. There was no way that he could do it all by himself. He wanted to pull off one big-ass job so that he could retire with the amount of money that he was going to get. Hall decided to reach out to an ex-lover of his who he thought could help with the large job, a woman named Mary Coggles. It was said that Mary's nickname was Belfast Mary, and some sources said that she was a sex worker. Mary was said to be the type of person who could easily be persuaded into doing different illegal activities for the right price. When Hall went to meet Mary at a pub one night to discuss the job, Mary introduced Hall to a man that was with her, a 39-year-old Michael Kiddo. Michael Kiddo, as a child, had spent some time in the foster care system and then joined the military, probably wanting to get the fuck out of where he was. Kiddo would end up being dishonorably discharged after committing robbery. Kiddo had been married twice in his life, with both marriages unfortunately failing, but in one of those marriages, Kiddo would have a daughter. Kiddo was said to be somewhat of a drifter, working odd jobs and getting into trouble for what most would consider petty things. During the time that Hall met Kiddo, Kiddo was actually on the run for robbing the pub that he had been working at. Kiddo and Hall would actually hit it off and decided to start planning the robbery together. Now, I found conflicting stories for how this next part went down. The documentary said that one night Hall and Kiddo had been at a pub planning when they had decided to head back to the Elliots' home in search of more wine. And while the men were in the wine cellar, Mrs. Elliot walked in, and since Kiddo wasn't supposed to even be there, she demanded to know what was going on. Another source said that Mrs. Elliot wasn't supposed to be at the home. She was supposed to be at a nursing home getting some treatment for her arthritis. And the pair believed that Mr. Elliot would be fast asleep, and that's why Hall had brought Kiddo back to their home. Finally, one last source said that Mrs. Elliot overheard Hall and Kiddo planning their robbery, and that's why she confronted them that evening. So my guess is that the truth is a little bit of all of this. They're all very similar with just a few different details, but either way, one thing we know 100% is that Miss Elliot came upon the men in her home, and Kiddo had absolutely no reason to be there, especially at night. This is when, according to Hall, Kiddo jumped up and sprang at Mrs. Elliot and assaulted her, knocking her to the floor. They then allegedly grabbed a pillow trying to stifle her screams, and the pair suffocated her. Then the pair decided to put Mrs. Elliot in her bed to make it look like she was sleeping until they could figure out what to do next. Mr. Elliot was said to have woken up during the time that the men were putting Dorothy into her bed, so the men just told Mr. Elliot that she just had a nightmare and to go back to sleep. So Hall and Kiddo both knew that Dorothy was such a popular socialite that her death was not going to go unnoticed, so they came up with a plan. The next day, Kiddo and Hall decided to put Dorothy's body in the trunk of a rented car, but across the pond, they call it a boot of a car, I just love that. Then they decided to drug Mr. Elliot and bring him out to the car in his half-conscious state of not really understanding what was going on. They then had Mary Coggles, their acquaintance, dress up in Dorothy's clothes, specifically her mink coat, and I believe some of her jewelry as well, and pretended to be Dorothy in the car with Mr. Elliot. They then drove Mr. Elliot around to various banks and had him withdraw very large amounts of money. They made Mr. Elliot also foot the bill for different hotels that they needed to stay at while they drove and drugged Mr. Elliot nearly 400 miles to Scotland. Fun fact, while I was scripting this, I didn't know if the saying was front the bill, which is what I had typed, or foot the bill. So I had to Google it, and it turns out that I'm an idiot and it's foot the bill, although I don't know why. Okay, anyways, during their travels, they would leave Mr. Elliot at a cottage with Mary still pretending to be his wife. Hall and Kiddo would then take Dorothy's corpse and bury it by the side of what was said to be a quiet road in Brocco, which is located in Perthshire, Scotland. Sorry if I'm butchering any of that. After this, it was said that Hall and Kiddo drove back to the Elliots' home and robbed the place for all they could. They then headed back to Mary and Mr. Elliot and picked them up. Then the four left to travel north. It was said that no one suspected anything unusual, as Hall and Kiddo just played the part of butlers to Mr. and Mrs. Elliot during their travels, and one source would say that on one particular occasion, they would leave the drugged Mr. Elliot in the car, saying that he was their grandfather, while Hall, Kiddo, and Mary had a good time at the hotel bar. On December 14th, near a place called Glen Affric, and after some research, I found out that this is a southwest village of another village called Cannock, in something called the Highland region of Scotland, and this is said to be about 15 miles to the west of Loch Ness. This day is when Kiddo decided that they needed to get rid of Mr. Elliot, so Hall attempted to strangle him, but the man, even though he was in his 80s, still had some fight left in him, and he ended up being too strong for Hall to kill on his own. This is when Kiddo had to get a shovel, which was used to then beat Mr. Elliot to death. The pair then used the same shovel to bury Mr. Elliot in a shallow grave. So, the day after Mr. Elliot's murder, it was said that Mary wanted to keep and continue wearing the mink coat of Mrs. Dorothy Elliot, but Hall wanted to destroy it because it was evidence. He knew that people would eventually go looking for the Elliots, as they were well known, and that their disappearance would be noticed. Hall also figured out by now that people in the area may even be looking for the Elliots already, and thought that if Mary wanted to keep and wear that coat, that it would bring unwanted attention. Hall knew that they had been seen by many hotel staff along the way up north, and thought that it would be easy to find them if she had the coat with her. The trio had drove up north to Cumbria to stay at a small cottage that they had rented. The three of them were wanting to keep a low profile while they were on the run, essentially, and it was said that Hall didn't think that Mary was a good enough actress to be wearing an item like a mink coat, which was so high class, and thought that even people in the small village may find her suspicious. When Hall asked Mary to give up the coat, it was said that Mary flew into a rage and would not give up the coat. During their stay at this cottage, people in the village believed Hall to be an antiques dealer, and Kiddo and Hall would actually make trips down to the Elliots' home to collect more of their antiques to sell for money. They ended up telling the Elliots' caretaker that both Mr. and Mrs. Elliot ended up having to go abroad unexpectedly. When the documentary said caretaker, I just kind of assumed that it meant like groundskeeper, but I guess it could have been their personal caretaker. Maybe they bumped into that person pretty early on and were able to give that excuse, which is why they didn't really alert anyone. Anyways, Mary not giving up her new mink coat became such a point of contention for Hall that he decided that it was time to get rid of Miss Mary Coggles. Hall would later say that he had planned to kill Mary at one point in time, but that because of his quote-unquote sexual magnetism that he was always boasting about, Mary was said to have convinced Hall to have sex with her on the mink coat in front of the fire, and because of this, he decided to let her live. Well, that must have been a short-lived thought, because not long after, Hall would take the fireplace poker and start to beat her with it. This is when Kiddo would join the scene, and as Hall is beating poor Mary with the poker, Kiddo placed a plastic bag around Mary's head, and the pair killed Mary Coggles. The next day, Hall and Kiddo put Mary's body in the trunk of the car after having dressed her in men's clothing, and they dumped her near a stream in Dumfriesshire. A shepherd walking down the creek or the stream would be the person who would find Mary's body. On Christmas Day in 1977, there would be a 29-year-old policeman named Alan Place who got a phone call to his home in Middleby, Scotland, and had been told that there was a woman's body found and that he needed to go secure the area for the CID. After looking it up, the CID is the Criminal Investigation Department, which is a branch of the authorities that deals with the more serious crimes and investigation, things like sexual offenses, fraud, robberies, more serious assaults, and murder. Alan would go on to say that the scene itself was not particularly gruesome. Mary had head and facial injuries. He said that the murderer didn't make any effort to cover up the body. It basically just looked like someone had killed her and then tipped her over the bridge nearby. They didn't have much to go on as far as the murder because the authorities had no idea who or why someone had killed her. I always wonder what it would be like to find a body. Like, can you imagine just a regular normal day and you're walking and boom, out of nowhere you see a dead body? I mean, what would that be like? I'm always worried that I'm somehow desensitized to violence or like crimes because I love true crime so much and I can talk about death of people more easily, but I don't think that I am because when I see autopsy photos or crime scene photos, they still have such a fucking shock value for me. I think it's one thing to do what I do, and sometimes it's easy to think of these people as like stories and disassociate from the cases. But then there are things that you see or whatever you watch or look at that brings you right back to reality that, oh shit, these are real people. There are real people out there that have found dead bodies, and I'm sure it has changed them forever. I cannot imagine. After the murder of Mary, Kiddo and Hall headed out to Hall's sister home in Staffordshire, which is located in the West Midlands of England. They actually ended up spending the Christmas holiday with Hall's family, keeping a low profile, and the holiday was said to be pretty quiet. After the holiday season, Hall and Kiddo would head up to Hall's family home in Cumbria, only to find a familiar face already there. Hall's younger brother, Donald Hall, was staying with them at the Cumbria home. Donald was said to have just gotten out of prison after a 3-year stint for burglary. Donald was said to be an unkempt man that was gross in his appearance. Archibald Hall was always the gentleman that he had practiced being for so long. He was very well put together, well-groomed, and composed. Donald, on the other hand, seemed to be the very definition of opposite. Donald had long hair, was said to be scruffy, and it was said that Hall absolutely loathed his brother. Donald was also said to be a pedophile. I believe it said a convicted pedophile to top it off. So basically, Donald is a fucking shitbag. Not that Hall was any better, but still. On the other hand, Donald was said to not care for Hall much either because Donald didn't like Hall's sexual preferences. Oh my god, the pedophile has a high horse to get on for his brother being bisexual. What in the actual fuck? So it was said that Donald had been a little too eager to join in on the plan for the robberies that Hall and Kiddo were preparing to rob Lady Hudson. Hall wanted to pull off his large robbery that he had wanted so he could retire, and him and Kiddo felt that Lady Hudson could be the one to do it. During their planning, it was said that Donald had basically inserted himself into the plan and then was boasting that he was really good at tying people up and being able to keep them from doing anything by tying their arms and legs very well. As Donald was not only inserting himself into the plan, he was also asking way too many questions for Hall's liking, so one day after a drinking session, although one source said Hall had actually taken his brother out for some fine dining and then drinks, but either way, Hall and Kiddo asked Donald if he could show them his tying techniques, and then they asked if they could practice on Donald, and of course, he let them. After Donald was tied up, Hall would place a chloroform-soaked rag over Donald's face until he was unconscious. After Donald was unconscious, Kiddo held his mouth open while Hall poured the chloroform down his throat, and this would actually be what killed him. This was also said to be Britain's first chloroform murder. It seemed that Hall didn't want anyone standing in his way of being rich, the way he had always dreamt, and had no qualms about killing his own brother to achieve that dream. The next day, which was January 15th, 1978, Kiddo and Hall had Donald's body in the car as they found themselves driving north yet again, looking for a place to dispose of his body. It was said that at this time, Hall had gotten a different car for this trip, a Ford Granada, and on this vehicle, the license plate included the numbers 999. I guess Hall had a problem with the number 999, thinking it was like unlucky or something, so he told Kiddo to find a car of the same make and model and take the license plate off of it. But because Kiddo was lazy and didn't give a shit, he just grabbed some random license plate and slapped it on the car. Now, it was said that the license plate no longer matched something called the tax disc. I had to research what this was because in my mind it was the registration, so I was like, well, who cares as long as they don't get pulled over, but I was wrong. According to a user on Reddit who is maybe from this area, a tax disc is a round piece of paper that is always displayed on the passenger side of the windshield. Over there they call it the windscreen. I love it. So in the UK, you apparently have to have this tax disc because it shows that you have paid your road tax for that year. And it also shows the license plate number on it with the expiration date of the tax right on there. So the pair was supposedly heading in the direction of one of Hall's friend's mother's house where they were going to stay, I don't know, for maybe one night or a few nights. But because it had been snowing, not only was the ground too frozen for the men to dispose of Donald's body that was still in the trunk, but the pair ended up having to stay in a hotel for the night because of the snowstorm. So they stay at this hotel called the Blenheim House Hotel in North Berwick. Apparently, as Hall and Kiddo were drinking at the hotel bar, the person working at the hotel felt like something was off, and he felt like the men were very suspicious, so he decided for whatever reason to call the police and asked them to check out the registration of the car. The authorities would figure out that the license plates were not for that specific vehicle, and of course, they did not match the tax disc, and they decided to head to the hotel to talk to Kiddo and Hall. When the police arrived, they ended up taking Hall and Kiddo in on suspicion of having a stolen vehicle. When the pair were taken to the police station, Hall kept asking to use the restroom, and it turns out he was actually flushing evidence down the toilet each time. Police would later comment that both of the men were quite calm, they were collected, and they were confident in their questioning. When the police would end up opening the trunk of the car, they found Donald's body. They knew that these two men had done a lot more than just falsify plates on a car. During one of the trips to the bathroom at the police station, Hall was actually able to squeeze out of the window and flee. It was said that Hall was quickly found, though, because of the fact that he was so nicely dressed and had a red and white polka-dotted handkerchief in his breast pocket. He would be found at a roadblock, in a taxi, and then he was arrested. After Hall was arrested, it was said that he actually swallowed a bunch of pills that he had had on him in an effort to commit suicide. Unfortunately for him, he was taken to Edinburgh Hospital and treated and then released back into police custody. At this point, Hall and Kiddo were arrested on suspicion of murdering, among other crimes as well. It was said that at some point the authorities had been tipped off about some silverware that was stolen from the Elliots' home and then subsequently sold. After this, things were unraveling fast for the men as they both started confessing to the various crimes. When it came to Dorothy's murder, both Hall and Kiddo were blaming each other for that murder. When it came to Mary's murder, Hall tried to sell the story that Mary had just fallen off the bridge and cracked her head, and then she died. Police officer Alan Place said that when Hall was brought in, he noticed immediately that Hall was very well spoken with an English accent, although his Scottish brogue was kind of poking through. Alan would also say that Hall didn't really seem to lie to him very much, but he did kind of have an air of arrogance about him, and seemed to have an attitude that's like, you tell me what I've done, and I'll tell you if you're right. So on January 18th, 1978, Walter Scott Elliott's body would be found with the help of Hall. One source said that when they had found the decomposing body, they saw that it had been chewed up by foxes. Just 3 days later, Hall would tell the authorities about murdering David Wright, and then he took the police to where the body was, and the authorities would then excavate his remains. One of the officers that was there said that they actually had to carry his body on an old door because they didn't have a stretcher. All I could think while he was talking about finding this body, and I'm sorry if this is rude, but wouldn't it smell so bad? I can't imagine what that smell is like after a body has been decomposing for that long. Wow. On January 23rd, 1978, Hall would then take police to Dorothy Elliott's body. One source said about Donald's murder that the only person in the entire world that Hall gave two shits about was apparently a daughter he had named Caroline. And the source thought that maybe in some way, since his brother was like a convicted pedophile, maybe that's why he killed his brother to somehow protect his daughter. I call bullshit, but that's just my opinion. I don't think that Hall had anything to do with his daughter. She never came up in any other reports, and hopefully he loved her, but I think he killed his brother because he hated him and he didn't want him involved in his plans to get rich. Hall, during his confession, would say that Kiddo was the reason for all of his murderous crimes because he would say that Kiddo steered him towards the crimes. Experts thought that after studying this case, Hall may have went on to kill Kiddo next because he would have been another loose end or possibly a liability. Hall would say to the authorities about the murders, quote, "I can't feel anything for killing these 5 people, not even remorse," end quote. During Hall's first trial, because him and Kiddo both ended up having to go to trial twice, since some of the murders occurred in Scotland and others occurred in England. During Hall's trial in Edinburgh, and this was in May of 1978, so not very long after they were caught, Hall would be described as a psychopath. Hall would be convicted of the murders in Edinburgh, but the judge ordered the courts to leave the case for Dorothy Elliott open. Maybe because they weren't exactly sure which one of the men had killed her, but why not just charge them both if they both killed her? So Hall would be handed 2 life sentences for the murders in England. Kiddo would be handed 1 life sentence for his crimes as well. Then Hall and Kiddo were taken to the Old Bailey in Scotland, where Hall would be handed another 2 life sentences, but it was recommended that Hall serve no less than 15 years. That's crazy to me. Kiddo was handed a life sentence with no minimum recommendation. In Hall's case, one of the judges had said, quote, "Having regard to your cold-blooded behavior and undoubted leadership in these dreadful matters, I recommend that you shall not be considered for parole during the rest of your natural life," end quote. It was said that Hall attempted suicide several times while he was incarcerated, and it was also said that he would go on numerous hunger strikes while he was in prison. In 1999, Hall would come out with his autobiography called A Perfect Gentleman, where he would say, quote, "A side of me when aroused is cold and completely heartless," end quote. Hall would actually go on to write 2 other books as well, and there's a movie about his story as well, although I haven't seen it. I remember seeing on Reddit that someone who had read one of his autobiographies or books had said that Hall admitted that he had wasted his life. While I'm glad that he realized that what he did was just a fucking waste, I hope that he also feels remorse for killing all those people, but many people involved in this story said that Hall didn't feel remorseful in the least. Archibald Hall would die in prison at the age of 78 due to natural causes in Kingston Prison, Portsmouth in 2002. Michael Kiddo has since been released, but there is no word on his whereabouts, which is fucking scary. The ironic thing is that if Hall wouldn't have had Kiddo change out the license plates because he felt that 999 was unlucky, they may have never been caught. And that, my friends, is the story of Archibald Hall, a.k.a. Roy Fontaine, the murderous butler who craved wealth, status, and fame, but in reality was just a huge piece of shit. This case was so interesting to me in the fact that not only did this man just crave this lifestyle that he saw in the movies of like luxury and wealth and, like the movies seem to be like in the 40s, but instead of trying to find a path of like hard work or ideas that could help him achieve that lifestyle or at least try, he decided that it was a better idea to steal that lifestyle from someone else. Also, who the fuck becomes a serial killer at the age of 53? Like, he went most of his life being a thief and a shitbag, but at least he didn't kill anyone. But becoming a murderer at 53? Ugh. He was just such a good con man that he was able to worm his way into people's lives and homes and pretend to be something that he wasn't for so long. That's just mind-blowing to me. Just changing his accent alone, permanently, is like commitment to the bit. Too bad that he couldn't have just rubbed elbows at the fancy parties and tried to become an actor. I really got the sense that he was just so arrogant and grandiose, and I remember one source saying that he truly thought that people were going to look at him like Cary Grant. Like, dude, you're fucking delusional. Some people just aren't fancy, and that's okay. Like me, I am not a bougie lady, and that's all right. You are who you are, you just gotta accept it and love yourself anyways. I hope you guys will come on back next week when we will cover another case here on The Kill File. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. Well, that's it for today, you guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and listening to another episode of The Kill File. Don't forget to check out the merch shop, either at thekillfile.com and click Shop Merch, or you can visit thekillfile.printify.me/products for some awesome true crime merch. Also, follow along on The Kill File's socials for posts about episodes, pictures about the cases, for updates, and more. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X as The Kill File, and we are on YouTube and TikTok as The Kill File Podcast. Also, feel free to check out the website at thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about me, your host. You can learn a little bit more about how The Kill File got started, And you can suggest a case right there on the website. Let me know in your case suggestion if you want me to shout out your name if I cover your case. There's contact info on the site as well. You guys have no idea how much I love to hear from you. It makes my whole day. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on the Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.